We've talked about Cassie, we've talked about Jane, we've talked about Mia. Hey, we've even talked about alleged victim 3 who may or may not testify in P. Diddy's criminal trial, but you remember alleged victim 5? If you don't, I'm going to explain, and also what role she may play in this trial. I mean, is she even going to testify? And does the prosecution need her to testify? Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Lots of witnesses and alleged victims have testified so far in Sean Diddy Combs' criminal trial. There's Cassie, there's Mia, there's Jane, there's Brianna Bungolan, there's Capricorn Clark, witnesses who described alleged sexual assaults, physical violence, being kidnapped, dangled off a balcony. But you know who hasn't testified? You know who hasn't come up in a while? Victim 5. There was always talk about Victim 5, particularly after alleged Victim 3 basically hasn't shown up. We did a whole Sidebar episode on the difficulty to track down Victim 3 and whether or not she's actually going to be part of the case. There's been some mixed messaging from the prosecution and the defense on that. But one of the reasons that we're thinking now about alleged Victim 5, who came up later during the course of this whole criminal saga, is whether she's going to testify. And the reason it came up is because we do this Law&Crime live lunchtime show on YouTube every single day. Hope everybody can check it out. And we actually take viewers' questions for that hour and a half period. And we got this question from somebody who regularly submits questions on YouTube, a user named Nestdog, and asked a super chat question: isn't there a fifth victim? And it got us thinking, yeah, there apparently is. I'll give you an example. There was this pretrial filing, and the defense was fighting to exclude the government's evidence of similar crimes or wrong acts on the part of Sean Combs. And they indicated that Victim 5 was interviewed multiple times in 2025 by federal authorities. And the reporting indicates that Judge Arun Subramanian was going to allow this prior sexual assault accuser to take the stand in an effort to support the prosecution's case of sexual abuse and coercion, which is part of sex trafficking and racketeering. But, by the way, right on the eve of trial beginning, so I believe during jury selection, the judge denied alleged Victim 5 the ability to testify using a pseudonym. So, assuming Victim 5 has not testified, and there's no reason to believe that she has of yet, I don't think she was called in any which way, the question is, will she testify? To what extent? Is she necessary? So for that, let me bring on criminal defense attorney Brian McMonagle. Brian's from the firm of McMonagle, Perry, McGeough, Meshach, and Davis. He famously represented Bill Cosby and Meek Mill. Brian, it's been a minute. Thanks so much for taking the time to come back here on Sidebar.
Well, Jess, thanks for having me back. It's always my pleasure.
What would be the value of Victim 5 to testify in this prosecution?
You know, when you've got a case as a prosecutor with multiple victims, for lack of a better way to describe it, sometimes, you can call too many. I would think if I'm the prosecutors in this case, particularly given the avalanche of testimony regarding, the sexual depravity, the coercion, the domestic violence, what does one more get you? And does the one more put you someplace that you aren't already? And could, by calling just one more, you create a problem for yourself if, for instance, the defense has some smoking gun that blows that one witness out of the water? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how the prosecution feels right now in their case. I don't know what they're seeing from this jury. I don't know how the jury has received cross-examination, which has been significant and which has been beating a pretty consistent drum of, hey, listen, it's sexually depraved conduct. Yep, he's guilty of a lot of state crimes, including domestic violence, but he is not a racketeer. And getting back to your initial question, the answer is, where do they think they stand now?
Do you think the fact that we haven't heard more information about Victim 5 indicates that she might not testify? I mean, how much advance notice does the prosecution need to provide that they're going to call her? Because in this sense, the witness list is sealed. We don't ever have an idea about who they're calling until like the day, towards the end of the day before. So when 3 o'clock, 3:30, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock Eastern rolls around, we start to get a sense of, the judge says, who are you going to call next? Maybe even at the beginning of the day, they'll give an indication about who they're going to call. I haven't heard anything. I haven't heard anything about Victim-5 being called next. Right now, as we record, Jane is currently testifying, being cross-examined. Does that signal to you that she might not be called? Does it signify to you the prosecution may make they might be on the witness list, but they might make a game time decision whether to call her?
I think so. I mean, I would if I was them. I mean, why not make it a game time decision? I mean, do they really need it? What does it help them with in terms of the lead charges in the case, particularly the racketeering and the transportation charges? I honestly don't know the answer, but I would say this. They sure do. I think they know exactly what they're going to do. I think they want to see how these witnesses fare. And one other thing, Jesse, and you know this, you always want to start strong and end strong. And I guarantee you, as a prosecutor, and I don't know how many they've got on this case, some with some really great experience, they've made that evaluation. They started right out of the gates, as we remember, with the biggest piece of evidence they had. They're going to want to end with something very, very, very strong. And if 5 is not that, then you may not see 5.
Do you think it has to do with the fact that we don't know what's going on with victim 3? Again, I did a whole sidebar on it. We believe this is Gina, who has come up a lot during the course of this case as a potential love interest for Sean Combs, who is, seemingly a point of jealousy for other women that he was seeing, including Cassie, including Jane. You wonder what her testimony would look like. The defense had said at one point a couple weeks ago, she's not a part of this case anymore. The prosecution countered and said she's still part of the case. I don't know what's going on. There was reporting that they couldn't get a hold of her. They couldn't get a hold of her attorney. Again, if they can't call her, if she's not going to be an available witness, is it, well, we got victim 5 we could still bring in?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, it could simply be that. I think more than anything, as I've studied this, as I've watched it, as I've listened to the commentary of how cross-examination is going, you can, as a prosecutor, you can go too far sometimes, and a jury can get numb to something that they shouldn't be numb to. Is number 5 going to get up there and say something markedly different than they haven't heard for weeks and weeks? And if the answer to that question is no, then what did they gain? This jury knows that he's a deviant. This jury knows that he's sexually violent. This jury knows that he has a life based on this kind of conduct that is foreign to them and horrific in many measures. So what is it that they're going to accomplish by calling this witness that this jury doesn't already know? Does it get them to those legal elements on the charge of racketeering that they most vitally need? Does it get them to a point where they said, okay, ladies and gentlemen, now you've heard it 5 times, 6 times, 7 times? I don't know. I would worry if I was the prosecution about pulling another witness to say the same thing with just a different face.
By the way, I got to say this, totally unrelated, but a very serious issue. Can we talk about debt for a second? Debt doesn't just show up one day. It builds little by little. Credit cards, car loans, medical bills. Suddenly you're juggling all of these payments. You're feeling stuck. The good news is we got American Financing as our sponsor. Yep, they help homeowners like you every day. They use your home's equity and they roll that high interest debt into one simple, affordable payment. They're saving homeowners an average of $800 a month. There's no judgment. There's no pressure, just real solutions that put you back in control. Imagine breathing again, sleeping again, knowing your future is yours to shape. It starts with one call, only takes 10 minutes to get started, and there are no upfront fees, so it costs you nothing to find out how much you can save. And if you start today, you may be able to delay your next 2 mortgage payments. American Financing salary-based consultants, they're ready to listen, they're ready to help. Take back your peace of mind with American Financing. Call American Financing today at 866-891-2821. That's 866-891-2821, or head over to americanfinancing.net/sidebar. Let me counter that. I think the argument would be, if you're presenting a racketeering case and the first opening paragraphs, pick whichever indictment you want. any superseding indictment that he's been facing. The opening paragraphs are that essentially he engaged in a pattern of abusing women and sexually exploiting women. And you need multiple witnesses to testify to it. And I imagine if she's going to be testifying in a way to say, hey, she doesn't make up an individual sex trafficking count, but hey, this is evidence that what Sean Combs was doing, this was no mistake. It wasn't a lack of knowledge about consent. This is an example. He knew exactly what he was doing. This is a pattern of abusing women. And by the way, the more people you have testify to violence or sexual assault, and again, I don't know exactly what she would testify to, it arguably corroborates the other allegations of the other alleged victims. You know, there's one thing to say that the videotape of him appearing to beat Cassandra Ventura, that tape may corroborate every other allegation of violence that is leveled against him that isn't documented on videotape or text messages or photos. Once you see that, everything else could be believable. The more that you talk about violence and the more that you talk about sexual assault, it corroborates the testimony of a Mia or a Jane or a Cassie. So I wonder, the more, obviously there of course is a risk with another witness taking the stand, but the more they might need as many potential victims as possible for a racketeering charge.
You make the case for the prosecution, and you do it ably. I just would say that I think they've made the case of sexual violence.
Yep.
I think they've made the case of sexual depravity. I think they've made the case of bringing in prostitutes so that I can watch somebody exploit someone I'm in a relationship with. Are they going to make the case, though, that what this jury is seeing and hearing was coercion to a level of criminality? And what I mean by that is every one of these witnesses has taken a lot of heat with their text messages. The defense has done an able job of showing time and time again that they're carrying favor with him, that they're loving him, that this most recent witness still loves him. And so what does that mean to this jury? I mean, does the jury say to themselves, I think everybody's crazy? I mean, does the jury say to themselves, listen, they're all part of this sick world, and but we're here for a federal crime. Yeah, he's guilty of state crime. So I just wonder if you're going to spend another week of this jury's life to tell them something they already know. I think they want the meat on the bone, and I wonder what the prosecution has decided that their last best piece of evidence is. That's what we'll see, because they've made the case that he has a pattern of abuse, a pattern of depravity. Can they make the case that these witnesses did so involuntarily, that they did so under threat of violence or coercion? That's where the rubber's going to meet the road here, Jess.
Especially if they're trying to say he's the leader of a criminal enterprise and was engaging in all these different crimes and having assistants and staff cover it up and facilitate it. You make a really good point about the number, right? You make a really good point about the number. There's two ways to look at it, right? One way of looking at it is and this is generalizing and it's grouping them together, but I agree, there was very consistent cross-examination, right? They're cross-examining these alleged victims and witnesses, whether it's Jane or Mia or Dawn Richard or Capricorn Clark or Jane or Cassie. Inconsistent statements, not providing all the information to prosecutors when they could, evidence that these alleged attacks happened when they didn't. I mean, Brianna Bungolan, who said she was dangled off a 17-story balcony, she was confronted with travel receipts and metadata that would indicate the attack didn't happen when she thought it happened, although she claims she might not remember the date, but she does remember. She does testify that it did happen. You listen to all this, and the jury will either have to accept, why they stayed in touch with Combs or praised him on social media. Either the jury's going to have to accept that multiple victims, multiple people, they're all a product of the complicated relationship of trauma that was testified to by Dr. Dawn Hughes, right? They might act in ways that seem inconsistent with being victims, but they really are. They may all be a product of that. I don't know if the jury is going to necessarily agree. Or the problem maybe for the defense is every single one of them is lying, or every single one of them's telling the truth, but it's the prosecutors who are transforming their testimony into this racketeering sex trafficking case, and shame on you prosecutors for doing that. So in a way, you gotta group them together, which could either be beneficial for the prosecution or beneficial for the defense, right?
You're absolutely right. And I just wondered to myself, again, from the very beginning in this case, the defense seemed to be, they made a federal case out of it. And you hear it time and time again. Here they made a racketeering case out of it. And, jurors have their own preconceptions about what racketeering is, but they think John Gotti. They don't think Johnny Watt, I keep going back to that. This is a guy who lived his life in a bizarre way sexually. He's a violent man toward women. All of that is the case. Is this a racketeering enterprise, or is this just some really rich guy who's bizarre, violent, sexually violent, who manages somehow to find these women who are willing to stay in relationships with him despite the bizarre requests and requirements of those relationships, and the depraved way in which he treats them and sees others treating them, has others treating them. I think the problem for the prosecution will be, moving forward, is there something more they're going to tell this jury than they haven't already told them by now? They've told them a lot, but have they told them racketeering? I don't know.
I mean, for the argument for racketeering is, at least there's a couple of components. I've always said that, for the underlying crimes, they have to prove at least two underlying crimes, predicate crimes. I think Kid Cudi, arson; Capricorn Clark, kidnapping; sex trafficking, if they believe Cassie, and I think there's a couple of instances that are more concrete than others. Drug distribution, you look at Jane and others who basically said staff members, carried drugs for Sean Combs, including transporting them across state lines. Bribery, Eddie Garcia, the hotel guard who claims he was paid $100,000 that he split with two other people to hand over the videotape of Combs beating Cassandra Ventura. I think they've proven, or at least checked off the boxes, for the jury to digest at least two predicate crimes. And in terms of him being the leader of a criminal enterprise, the more that you hear from the assistants, we all knew what the game was. Our goal was to protect him. If he's protected, we're all doing better. It's his kingdom. We're all here to serve it. Show this kind of coordination. Everybody's on the same page. I can kind of see where they're going with that. But yeah, I hear you. And I do wonder with Victim-5, if they do call her, if that shows they don't feel confident in their case right now, or they do feel confident in their case and they want to add something to it. I'd have to tell you, with some of the really, really strong cross-examination, whether it's Mia, who claimed she was sexually assaulted by Sean Combs, yet had these praising messages to him, and both on text or social media. But again, there's a complicated relationship between abusers and victims, why someone might do that. Or Brianna Bongolan, as I mentioned, the different evidence to suggest that a balcony attack didn't happen. The prosecution knows this. They know these things are going to come out. It does make you wonder, federal prosecutors, Southern District of New York, why would they do that? If they're having all these legal analysts saying, I don't get it. I don't get why you would call these witnesses. Why'd you need them for this case? It does make you wonder, what can they expect from Victim-5?
Well, it's historical win-loss records, Jess. They always do better when they've got more. They've got more than anybody, typically federal prosecutors, and they know in sex offenses, looking at cases like the Cosby case, which really took on a life of its own, the more, the merrier. And the more accusers you've got, the more you think you're closer to a successful prosecution. That's Hornbook. That's basic. But when you've already got a lot and you're making a decision as to whether or not you need one more, that's kind of where I am with this.
Yeah.
We have heard for weeks a lot, and I don't think the defense is going to be able to capably argue that everybody made everything up. That ship has sailed. they're nuanced in their defense right now. They're lying about some things, they're telling the truth about others. They're going to attack them on whether or not this was coercion or them just looking for a payday and staying in a relationship that was sick and depraved, but they did it for the money. I just wonder if, and don't get me wrong, if I'm the defense attorney in this case, I'm hoping Victim-5 doesn't get called. Yeah. Make no mistake about it. Yeah. They don't want to have to successfully cross-examine another witness. Because it may not be so successful. But I just wonder where, answering the central question of whether or not 5 testifies or not, I think it comes down to where the prosecution believes they are. And if they think they've got a 10-run lead, then you won't see that witness, I can guarantee you. But they may think this is going to be a dogfight at the end. They've got to convince 12, not just 11, not just 10. It's got to be unanimous on racketeering and every other charge. They may say, you know what, we've seen some things up there in the jury box we don't like. Let's hit them over the head one more week of violence, one more week of depravity, and we'll be able to put this in the end zone.
Why would the judge not allow Victim-5 to testify using a pseudonym?
There, quite frankly, the use of pseudonyms and anonymous witnesses is completely scorned by the courts. It is not the rule, it is the exception. And unless there's some really exceptional circumstances, there should not be a situation where a witness gets to testify with anonymity. It just shouldn't be. They're under cross-examination. They're making accusations that could put a man in jail for the rest of his life. If you got something to say, put your name behind it. These are adults, these are not children. The rules are state your name, get sworn in, and testify. So I think the judge's ruling is on all fours. It's the other times where you get anonymity that I think it's a problem, personally and professionally. I will tell you this too, for prosecutors, anonymity is not your friend. Jurors are not partial to anonymous witnesses.
Really?
They're just not.
Why is that?
Unless it's a why is that person hiding their name? It's not a mob case. It's not someone that, is in witness protection. This is a case involving allegations of people who all know each other, who most everybody knows anyway, who've been involved in civil lawsuits. In my mind, there's never a good reason for anonymity unless there's a great risk of death or serious bodily injury to that witness, or if it's a child.
Well, what happens if it's harassment? It became a thing like, this is such a high-profile case, particularly with no cameras. It seems that there is this concerted effort to try to find out the identities of these people. And there are people online who will listen to this testimony of certain witnesses who've testified under anonymity and say, I don't believe her. I think it's a payday. I think she's lying. They'll try to find videos of her. And that's a form of harassment. And you're testifying in one of the biggest criminal cases that we've had in the last 20 years against Sean Diddy Combs. He has quite the following. He has a support group. There are people who might be skeptical, and they might have concern. And by the way, if their identity was revealed and they're now a reluctant witness, which, by the way, let's talk about that with Victim-5. If now she has to testify using her real name, obviously she doesn't have a choice, and if she's going to testify, she'll be subpoenaed. But does it change the character of her testimony? Would she be a more hostile witness? Does it want to say certain things? I can see the counter argument why you got to grant anonymity, because it could affect the actual substance of her testimony.
There's no question that it can. There's no question that it will. There's no question that there are some people that need protection. And you make a great point. In today's world, no one is safe, particularly with social media. But this is a criminal case. The defendant is presumed innocent. He's facing life imprisonment. There shouldn't be any barriers. There shouldn't be any masks. If you're going to go in and you're going to put this man in jail for the rest of his life, have his witnesses come in, stand up, show their face, and testify under oath. Quite frankly, after this trial's over, there'll be another trial. There'll be other trials. There'll be other celebrities on trial. And this will become, yesterday's news in short order. But if he's convicted of a crime he didn't commit, and I'm not saying he did by any stretch of the imagination, is a worse sin. That is a worse result than someone having to suffer the inconvenience and perhaps the harm of exposing themselves.
Brian McMonagle from McMonagle, Perry, McGeough, Meshach, and Davis, thank you so much for taking the time. Always love hearing your insight into this case, and would love to have you back on as this trial progresses.
Would love to be back on, Jess. It's good to see you. Take care.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.